the roll call?
Absolutely. Vice Chair Idner?
Here.
Commissioner Firestone?
Here.
Commissioner Wilson?
Here.
Commissioner Ruff?
Here.
And Commissioner Walker will be joining us just a little bit later in the meeting.
Sounds good. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Ready, begin. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Well, the next item on our agenda is public comments, but from the cards that I have, I only see... Oh, wait, hold on, sorry. There we go. First, we have Linda Wilson, please.
Hello. I need to leave early to go to a class, and so I would like to have special accommodations to speak on 6A.
That's absolutely fine.
Okay. I wanted to discuss pickleball, and I just wanted to say that there are so many people here in the Valley and from out of state that truly love playing pickleball right here on the courts, here on the city grounds, that there are so many that we need additional courts, and it seems that Libby Park, the lower courts, would be ideal financially. They seem to make the most sense for us to have those additional courts. And also, I had the opportunity to be part of the sound test. I was at Libby Park for that, and it was kind of interesting how it was done because the gentleman that was running it kept stopping us from hitting the ball anytime there would be traffic going by on Creek Road there. And I don't know if it's because of the sound of the cars and the trucks would drown us out from playing, but I just thought that was kind of interesting, and how we didn't get to play with our own equipment, that they had us play with their equipment that they brought. Another issue was one of the gals that was helping him, he went up to a residence, or he went to some property up above, and she was actually hitting the ball with us down there while we were hitting it back and forth. And he called her on the cell phone and told her to go ahead and start hitting, that we could do it. And meanwhile, we had already been playing, and so he didn't even hear us at all. So I don't know if it was the traffic that was the reason, but I just want to say that it was interesting how the test was done, and that there's, I know you have the results from it, but there's our side of the story too, the ones that were involved in it. So, thank you.
Thank
That's
you.
all.
And next up is Tim Krapp.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners, and staff. As I'm sure most of you are aware, it appears that the school board has decided to close some of the school campuses. This presents a golden opportunity for the city to expand their recreation programs by utilizing property already owned by the very people the city serves. I would hope that this commission, along with the city council, would reach out to the school board to discuss this golden opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's all I have for general comment, or non-agendized items. Anyone else? Okay.
We do have community members
Oh.
via Zoom, but none have raised their hand at this
For
particular
this.
moment.
Okay, thank you. All right. So on to the police report, please.
Absolutely. So for the month of February, there were lower than average calls for service. Beginning with the skate park, there was 2 calls for service and 1 extra patrol noted. There were no calls unrelated to recreation. For Libby Park, there were no calls for service and 2 extra patrols noted. 0 calls unrelated to recreation. 0 Zodi, very similar. No calls for service, 2 extra patrols noted, and 0 calls unrelated to recreation. For City Hall campus, there's an extra patrol noted and an arrest made for a person with an outstanding warrant. Clough Vista Park, Rotary Park, Daly Ranch Park, there's no calls for service. And with that, that concludes the police report for the month of February.
Okay, any questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, thank you for the report.
Mhm.
So then moving on to item 4, which is our Public Works report.
Absolutely. Beginning with Clough Vista Park, seasonal pruning continues. as well as the irrigation was turned off during the recent storms. The declining pine tree, that the removal of that was postponed due to the rain. That's still in plan for when that opportunity comes with less rain. Over at Daly Ranch Park, lawn repair is in progress. And again, the irrigation was turned off with the recent storms. They also performed channel maintenance at that park. Over at Libby Park, there's seasonal pruning. Again, irrigation was turned off. There's a monthly playground inspection and sanitation. And over at Livy Bowl, looks like there's some maintenance done as well. The high slide on the playground play structure is currently closed. It's being repaired, or we're going to replace that part of the structure. And at the skate park, it looks like graffiti was found and removed from the restrooms. At Zirazodi Park, the picnic area rentals were picnic areas were power washed. For the playground, monthly maintenance and inspection as well as sanitation was done. We've begun maintenance of the softball fields as we have softball programs starting fairly soon. And we had Edison come by to do some pruning of the trees near the power lines there as well. With that, that pretty much concludes the report for this time around.
Okay. Any comments or questions from commissioners? All right. Item 5 is our consent items. And the only item on there is our minutes from our February 2nd meeting. Any questions or comments, additions or changes? I'd entertain a motion. Here, second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes. Minutes are approved. So now we're on to our presentations, actions, and discussion items, and our first is 6A. How would the commission like to do, would we like to do presentation, then public comments? We've done it both ways.
Yeah.
We have PSM with us, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Is that, we've done it both ways, but I'm happy to do it that way.
Yeah, and so in their presentation, are they going to entertain questions? Luis?
From the commissioner.
From the commission, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, from the commission.
Okay, so we will have our presentation, and then we will have public comment as soon as the presentation is done, and then we'll have our discussion. So I will let you introduce this.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So I'd like to begin by thanking Mr. Robert Unitek, President of PSM, as well as Dr. Barry Wireman, acoustical engineer for PSM, for joining us this evening. They're joining us via Zoom. They will be presenting a summary of the final report as seen in attachment A of the staff report. Without diving too much into the actual report, the report contains information on the game of pickleball, the sound the game produces, how the sound can be appropriately measured, and how humans perceive that sound. A summary of their findings from the sound assessments can also be found in the report. As the report is received, the commission is encouraged to provide feedback to staff in the ad hoc committee on any items it wishes to have addressed in the final report from the ad hoc committee. That report is anticipated to be available at next month's meeting. With that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Unitek to begin the presentation. And Bob, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Yes, Luis, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I am Bob Unitich. I also have online Dr. Barry Wireman. We have 4 engineers in our firm here in Florida, and we deal with sound issues only in pickleball around the country. Dr. Wireman has a PhD in acoustics and has worked in the field of acoustics for decades. And I made a trip to Ojai in November. I arrived there the night of November 14th. With my wife. We happened to be traveling there in California, and we set up and ran a series of tests at 3 locations at Ojai, locations designated for us by Mr. Gomez. And we set up and ran the standard tests that we run. We use a calibrated microphone, a set of software called REW on a laptop, and we measure both the sound of pickleball and also the sound when there's no pickleball sound present. So we know what the background noise level is at each location. And usually we accumulate about 10 hits of pickleball and determine what the maximum level is at a particular location and what the average level is at that location. And that's what we did. We also always set up first at about 100 feet from the hitters so we can verify that the equipment is working well and that the players understand how we will interact. Stop them from time to time so we can measure background noise and then move on recording data. So we did this first at Soul Park. We recorded about the levels that we expected to record. That is, at 100 feet, we got numbers like 71 dBA, and it was reasonably quiet background noise there. I wrote down that I had 46 dBA as background noise at Soul Park. It was quite quiet until later in the day when some dogs started barking, but it was in the 40s, and 40s is in the range of what a library sound would be. So it was a reasonably quiet day. There was essentially no wind, and so we recorded pickleball sounds in the 60s and 70s at 100 feet, which was in the parking lot. We went to the golf course and we measured numbers in the low 50s. And the low 50s is relatively quiet, but nearly twice as loud as the very quiet background noise that we measured. And it's only half as loud as conversational sound. So someone walking on the golf course would find that the sound of pickleball on the hole that we were on was about half as loud as their own conversational noise levels. And so that went well. And so we moved on to Lower Libby Park. We did essentially the same setup at Lower Libby. We found the background noise there to be every bit as low. There was the occasional truck going by and so forth. But when you average noise over a period of 10 minutes or so, one vehicle or a couple of vehicles going by averages out to be a minimal amount of change in overall sound level. There, I measured once again in the mid 40s as background noise. We found the levels at 100 feet to be normal. So we moved to the home up above on the hill. And there we found that we could hear the pickleball sound, but only the loudest hits. The loudest hits were in the low 50s, not unlike the levels that we measured on the golf course, essentially in the same kind of range. Now, the resident at that location said that sometimes someone hits on the small practice court that's next to the court that's used occasionally for pickleball. And so we had our hitter move to that court and hit there. That changed the distance, by the way, from 240 feet to 200 feet. And sure enough, the sound got a decibel or so louder, which is about what we expected. It got into the mid 40s. And so this is a location and the number of homes up there that's relatively quiet in the mid 40s usually, and in the low 50s is the level of pickleball sound. I think you could hear it several homes up there. And this was the closest home on the porch of the lady who owns this home, which is right next to the Ojai Municipal Department lot. In the afternoon, we moved on to City Hall courts. We once again set up and ran the same set of tests. I did bring a pickleball paddle and some balls. I brought the Franklin ball. It's the most popular tournament ball. And I wanted to make sure that I had paddles, and I always do this, that were not unusual. I wanted to have usual kind of ordinary paddles that you might expect people to use in public parks. You run the risk when you do a field test that people could show up with very unusual paddles, either very loud or very quiet. And since we were trying to measure typical sound level, I wanted to use typical paddles. So at each location, I gave who we designated as a reasonably hard hitter, a particular paddle that we have. It's made by a company called Paddle Tech. And I also supplied the balls because there are some softer, quieter balls in use. But that once again would run the risk that someone could show up later with a harder ball and make more noise. So we used the Franklin ball. There I recorded numbers in the low 60s at the nearby homes. At the one home that was at 404 South Ventura, I think I recorded 66.1 dBA. Now, when I say 66.1, I mean using the metric that we use, which is called LAF max. That is, it's the level with A weighting in a fast mode and max hold. So that was a maximum number that we recorded during the hits. And the numbers during the hits range from the low 60s into the mid 60s. And it was very much what I had expected, because there was a sound barrier in place that does knock the level down somewhat. And we were measuring essentially with the sound barrier blocking our views of the courts. So we got levels in the mid 60s. And I basically reported that data in the preliminary report that we delivered the end of December. And I forwarded that data to my colleague, Dr. Barry Wireman, who was working on computer modeling of the site and much more extensive predictions of what levels would be in all directions. And that's the report he worked on through January and then submitted to the city of Ojai. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Wireman so he can report on the final report.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Can everybody hear me well enough?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to just expand on some of the points that Bob touched on. And I think one of the key things is that by having measurements on site, which you saw in a preliminary report from Bob, that enabled a model to be fit to the environment and to the site. So when you looked at the three individual sites of City Hall, Lower Libby, and Soul Park, there was generally good agreement between the measurements that Bob took and what the model had predicted based on where we put a player on the court. The advantage of that is what you saw in the report in several sound maps. Several of them were colored. We chose the colors so that the preferred region where there would be an absence of complaints or let's say almost imperceptible pickleball noise were the green zones. And we actually had a light green zone, a darker green zone, and then a Kelly green green zone. So that was our attempt to try to show the city of Ojai what the global situation is. Certainly the homes that are closest to any of these facilities will be the ones that will be exposed to the loudest noise. Sound dissipates the further it gets away from its source, but it's generally a well-accepted practice that if you can address the highest noise levels at the closest location, people at other locations will be satisfied. I think as Mr. Gomez reported, part of the report was intended to give a background on pickleball noise characteristics, the metrics to measure its sound propagation. It can be complex, and I think from what we tried to present here, we wanted to give an overview of how we address it. And one of the comments that Bob made, I want to emphasize, and that is that we have focused on a metric called the LAF max. L means the level, A means the A weighting, which simulates the human ear, and F is a fast weighting. And the max basically says that we're only picking up the loudest noises. So we're looking at a worst case scenario because that's what we really want to design against. As we've mentioned, pickleball is sort of a random process, and we've done studies where pickleball noise over a period of time will have a bell curve shape. If you pick the noise in the middle, at the top of the bell curve, that says half of the people will be satisfied on the low end. The people on the high end will not be satisfied. So one of the key things in terms of the measurements that were provided at the different sites at Ojai, as well as the noise modeling, is we're looking at a worst case situation. We want to look at that tail on a bell curve where we're going to satisfy 97 to 99% of it. With that in mind, I wanted to focus on the three main deliverables that were in the city of Ojai request for a proposal, and that was the noise analysis of each site, the noise ordinances, and how a noise ordinance could properly quantify and address pickleball noise, and then sound mitigation options. So in terms of the noise measurements from each site, Bob's numbers that he reported in a preliminary report speak for themselves. They have been included in the report with several dB, I'll call them global maps, because I think we went out probably anywhere from 300 to 600 feet from the sound source, and even further in some cases, just to show the sound propagation. And what you'll see there is near the courts or near the source of the noise, you'll get oranges and red colors, which sort of indicate high levels. As you move further out, it gets greener. And one of the mitigation measures that you will see is certainly barriers, which are in place at City Hall, but each building itself acts as a barrier. So if you're in the backyard of a building, you may not be near as exposed to sound, traffic noise or pickleball noise, whatever it is, if it's coming from an area in front of the house. However, having said that, most noise ordinances pertain to a noise at a property line. So it gives information to the city of Ojai to basically look at the validity of some of the complaints, because some people are more sensitive to noise than others, and even some of the noise codes, which are not quite as strong, basically say it should not be offensive to a person, to a reasonable person. So it really leaves the court to decide some of those things. But I think the bottom line is the color maps should give the city of Ojai a good indication of what's going on at each one of the sites. With that background information, we took a hard look at the city of Ojai noise ordinance and some of the other noise ordinances that have come into play to address pickleball noise, not only in California, but in states all over the country. I think it's a fair statement to say that many of these noise ordinances are deficient in terms of recognizing the unique impulsive characteristics of pickleball noise. Certainly Ojai has a clause in there where they do address impulse noise, but it really doesn't go into the detail of explaining that you really want to look at the maximum levels of these noise to make sure you're looking at a worst case scenario. As we've learned here in Florida, you'd like to build structures, whether it's bridges or condominiums, for the 100-year storm. And that's sort of the way we're looking at pickleball. You want to be able to address this for the worst case scenario. With that in mind, we have applied this LAF max metric to several pickleball studies that we've had, and it's more than just a single number. I think Bob brought up the point that when he was measuring the background noise varies. If you're in a very quiet situation like Soul Park, the background noise probably doesn't enter into very much of your measurements consideration, because you're significantly above it. When you're at City Park and you have a much higher background noise, from traffic and all the activity in a city center, part of that is going to swallow up some of the pickleball noise. But on the other side of it, you cannot really hold the pickleball noise accountable to be under the level of traffic noise. So one of the things that we have successfully used is a variable scale for pickleball noise that basically says if it's real quiet, we think an LAF max of 50 is a reasonable limit that people can live with. And if the noise level is above, starts to approach 50, for instance, if the background is 50, then the pickleball noise should have a 3 dB ceiling above that. And that signal to noise ratio has been found in our studies for other sites to be acceptable to some of the residents. And it really addresses the situation where you have a lot of traffic going on, or a lot of background noise competing with what you're trying to measure. The third part of the study was really looking at the noise mitigation measures. And we went into detail and talked about the many different noise mitigation measures that could be applied. Some of these could be considered extreme as far as restricting court time, which is basically an on-off switch for pickleball during critical times. Of the noise mitigation options, the most effective is a noise barrier at the maximum possible height. It's not just a noise barrier, but the height as well as the width become very important, because noise has a unique ability to sort of bend itself over the top of the barrier or bend itself around the sides of it. So that tends to be one of the more effective mitigation measures that are used. On the equipment side, pickleball sound mitigation, as separate studies has done a lot of paddle testing and ball testing, and not all paddles and not all balls are the same, just like not all SUV vehicles are the same. So one of the things that's come out of this is that there are groups of paddles that you could identify as quieter paddles. Are they stealth paddles that nobody will hear? No. That technology is far from being developed, but they are noticeably quieter. And to a lesser extent, that same effect has been seen for some of the balls. So in one case, I think we have specifically identified a very, very quiet paddle and a very, very quiet ball. So these bind as one additional way to reduce noise beyond any barrier placement could be solutioned. So with that in mind, we were asked to look at mitigation measures for each of the 3 sites to bring noise into compliance, either with an accepted standard or to the point where homes and residents nearby would not consider it offensive. So with that in mind, we looked at the situation at City Hall, which does have barriers on the east side and the south side. I raised those barriers in our noise model and looked at the sound reduction. I had to raise them to 30 feet high before I got enough sound attenuation over that high barrier. And that also required putting barriers on all 4 sides. So that's basically putting a confined barrier system on all 4 sides and very high to keep all the sound in that, or reflect all of the sound up to the sky and not over the top to any of the nearby homes on South Ventura. One of the questions was asked is, what happens if you combine the best paddle and ball strategy with a lower height barrier? We looked at a combination there which said that if you had a 15-foot high barrier, which would be slightly higher, and the best paddle and the best ball, you might be able to get to a situation that would be acceptable to the nearby residents on South Ventura. And one of the things that we would certainly recommend before any significant expenditures or further considerations would be made on barriers is to go out and buy a dozen of these paddles and ask people to play with them and see what and balls and see what the response is, not only from the players but from the nearby residents. Do they hear something different? If that's the case, it basically says that the barrier, the additional barrier height, may be enough to get this down to a level where it would be not offensive. So at Lower Libby, it's a completely different situation with the terrain there. The noise map does have the ability to put topography into it, so you see the effect of the hillside. And I think a couple of the figures in the report actually detailed that cross-section through a hillside. But to put a barrier around the court would really not be too effective, because you've got the slope of the hill that just channels the sound up the hill to that house on South Signal Street. So with that location being the critical location, the recommendation was to put a lower height barrier, an 8-foot barrier of enough width that it would block the sight and the sound to the lower pickleball courts. And part of the effectiveness of a barrier is based on the fact that if there's a line of sight, that is your weak link. So the success was achieved with an 8-foot high barrier at the crest of the hill, and it would probably extend from the house down to the service facility that's south of that might be City of Ojai property. I'm not sure. Certainly, if recommended gear, paddles and balls could be used at this site, that would have an additional benefit. But you always have the issue of trying to police that. And pickleball players tend to use their own equipment because it fits their own style of play. But without having to go into the issue of trying to enforce use of a paddle and ball, a barrier certainly at the crest of the hill above the Lower Libby courts could solve the noise issue there. If play were extended to the north court, because I believe the sampling was done on the south court, that barrier might have to extend a little bit further once the actual courts to be used would be identified. Soul Park is a situation, I think, as Bob described, that sort of sits all by itself. The closest home that I could identify from a Google map view was about 1,200 feet away, and the sound would be low enough there that any number of courts could be placed at that site without the additional expense of sound mitigation walls. And that's probably a significant thing for City of Ojai Parks and Recreations to consider, because some of these sound walls are not cheap. If there is money to be expended in terms of expanding a pickleball footprint, some consideration to new sites that are remote enough or in non-critical areas would avoid the expense of additional sound walls. And these don't have to be remote. Some pickleball clubs have had success locating their pickleball facilities next to highways, next to airports. This is not very desirable land from a homeowner standpoint, but it's perfectly fine for pickleball, and pickleball seems to coexist in some of those areas without the expense of noise mitigation. So with that in mind, Bob, do you have any final questions or comments, or we can accept any questions?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Barry, I forgot to say that I measured average background sound level at City Hall to be in the mid-low 50s. So it was about twice as much background noise as at the other two locations. And that raises the question, what would be an acceptable pickleball sound level? And so I think something in, as you said, several dB above the average noise, measured numbers like 53. If the level was down to 56 or so, I think it would be rather acceptable. But I measured as loud as 66. So I measured levels above that. So I would not be surprised that there are complaints. Barry talked about quieter paddles and balls. We've been doing extensive tests. This is one of the models that we say is one of the quietest paddles. You could buy paddles like that relatively inexpensively. And City Hall seemed to be the one location, the only location where you might have a chance to enforce the use of quieter equipment. With that, I think that's a summary of our report.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioners, before we do public comment, are there questions for our presenters?
I have a few. I've been pretty close to this report, so if others have, questions first, I'd encourage them to go ahead. But okay. First off, to the two of you, thank you very much for your work on this. I feel like we've had technical questions that we have not been able to answer in kind of figuring out what to do with pickleball here, and I feel like this work helps to answer those. So thank you for that. We've gotten a few comments from the public questioning the methods of doing the sound testing. And I think you've done a good job of explaining why you asked them to use a particular paddle and particular ball. But I don't know if there's anything else about the instructions, for example, instructing them to hit hard or pausing play during when some other noise was happening. I know we've got questions about that. Anything else you'd like to explain about kind of your methods for doing the sound testing?
Well, we pause play to measure background noise, and I do like to include traffic noise when I do that. But during those measurements, which take a period of time, you have to average the sound over 5 or 10 minutes at the least. During that period of time, you don't want to add in pickleball sounds. So I'd stop when we're ready and listen to and record the levels of all the traffic and birds chirping and any other noises, come up with an average, and then resume play. I didn't need much more than 10 hits to get a data point. So it may seem that it didn't take much time to record the results since we only were recording 10 hard hits. And that allowed us then to stop and to set up for another test. So that's what's really behind that procedure.
Okay, thanks. And then just to kind of go over the details, the ball you mentioned was a very common ball that's used in tournaments. The paddle that you selected was a typical paddle, so not kind of on the extreme of the loud end, or was it kind of louder than most paddles?
I would say, no, it's not louder than most paddles. Most paddles are in that variety. Inexpensive paddles like you would typically find at Dick's and Amazon, and the kind of thing that people are going to buy for under $100 generally are 1/2 inch thick, and they have a fiberglass face and a core either of Nomex or polyethylene. That's a pretty inexpensive construction technique, and it has a rather hard surface. Players actually like that hard surface because they can hit the ball really hard, and I would say players even like that loud pop sound because they get the sense, that audible feedback that they've hit a good hard shot. The truth is, a paddle like that does not have as much control of the ball. It takes a little rougher surface, and it doesn't have the balance that the professional level paddles use. And so higher level paddles, more expensive paddles, usually are a little thicker, and they have a somewhat softer face that gives you a little more control. And without them planning it, that also happened to benefit us in the sound business because it makes those paddles quieter. So we're actually arguing for higher quality, better paddles to be used in noise sensitive locations. And we're arguing that it will actually improve the game of players, recognizing though that they might have to spend $170 instead of $60. So yeah, it costs a little bit more, but it's like other sports. This is a case where more expensive equipment not only provides you a better game, but it also makes it quieter, which is fortunate. Balls happens to be a different story. In balls, players like hard balls, and tournament players in particular, like there's two balls. There are two types of plastic. The ordinary molded plastic is turned into the Dura Fast 40 ball and the Franklin X ball. There's a few others in that variety that copy those. That's a hard ball. It tends to crack in cold weather, but it's a hard, fast ball, and it is the most common ball in play. It's by far the most common ball in tournaments because the truth is tournament players like a hard ball that goes fast and helps them win points. Softer balls, I have some here, tend to be a little softer. I could put my thumb into that ball. It doesn't crack. If I did that on a Dura 40, there's a chance I would crack it. This softer ball it slows down a little bit more and it compresses while it's being hit. So it comes off the paddle a little bit slower. So it takes some of the speed away. But because it's compressed a little bit, it spends more time touching the paddle, and that makes the contact last longer and be less loud. So it's a softer feeling ball and a softer playing ball. There are many communities in Florida, gated communities, that use this ball, but it's not commonly used at public parks because you can't enforce it. And so right here in the Naples area, at the public parks, they'll use the Dora and the Franklin because that's what people buy inexpensively at Dick's and Amazon. At the gated communities, they typically play with this ball. When I visited Ojai, I thought, well, Lower Libby could benefit by a softer ball, but you would never be able to enforce it since people could show up in that little gully, that quiet area with any equipment that they purchased. However, at City Hall, I thought it was worthwhile to advocate, to suggest consideration of using a somewhat softer ball. There are about 10 different companies that make softer balls, and they vary from ball to ball. The very quietest one, we've tested every one of them, and we're partnering with USA Pickleball to test paddles and balls, and we publish the data. The very quietest approved ball is the Monarch Gen 2 ball, and it happens to be this ball, and it is the softest ball, and it's also the quietest ball. How much quieter? It's about 4 decibels quieter than the Dora, 4 to 5. And that's a worthwhile improvement. That's the benefit of 3 or 4 foot higher barrier just to switch to this ball. But you would have to worry about enforcing the ball. So that's the story on balls. By the way, these balls last longer because they're soft. They don't crack as easily. And I know it's usually not cold in Ojai, but they tell me you've had some cold weather. This would be the ball to use on cold days.
Thank you.
Sorry, Bob, I have to interrupt you. We got snow in the mountains right here, right now. It is cold in Ojai.
This would be the right ball then.
That's helpful. Another question along with that one, Dr. Wireman gave the example of like the 100-year flood as an example of kind of explain why you're looking for kind of the loudest sounds. But I don't think you're looking for the loudest sound that may occur in a 100-year period. Is it kind of the loudest sound like in a day or throughout the week or in a year?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we have done is we have collected pickleball noise over extended periods during a game play. And as you might expect, during a game, you've got very fast shots, you've got very slow shots, very strategic shots. You've got you might have 4 different people playing with 4 different paddles. So what we did is we looked at the distribution of these sounds in terms of level and time. So when you plot those and you look at a histogram, you get a very defined bell shape. Down at the low end, I'm measuring some very, very low sounds, which are associated with some of the soft hits of the game. Down up at the high end, I'm measuring some high level sounds, which are the smashes and the hardest hits. Coming from it could be some of the low cost paddles. It could be from some of the some of the pro type paddles. There's a distribution. What we tend to look at in terms of that distribution is we tend to look at the tail out at the far right end of that histogram, because that's basically saying if I can treat that noise there, then the 97%, if I'm looking at 2 standard deviations above the mean, I'm treating 97% of the situations that could occur, as opposed to if I say, gee, I've taken all these measurements over a 15-minute game or a whole day's play, and here's my average for the day. If I base my modeling on that, the mean basically says that 50% of the noise will still be higher than that. So I really don't want to use that mean for a modeling standpoint. So that's sort of our rationale for trying to look at worst case scenarios of noise, to basically say if you treat this with a proper mitigation strategy, whether it's a barrier or recommend paddles, no matter how hard they hit this ball with this type of paddle, you're going to be within an acceptable zone of quiet.
Okay.
And part of our goal was try to get the areas shown on those maps all into green zones as close as we could to the pickleball courts.
Okay, great. So I think when you talk about kind of the noise at a distance and location, it sounds like for a typical pickleball session, that would be like the top maybe couple % of sounds from that session is kind of.
Yeah, I think that's what Barry's saying. The top couple % are the levels we're talking about. You could go another standard deviation or two and say out of, let's say, every 1,000 hit, or let's say every 5,000 hits, once a day, it may be a couple of decibels louder still. But I don't think you'll get a complaint about that. We get a complaint, and we see complaints coming from people from this very frequent, every few seconds, every minute, some hits that are annoyingly loud. That gets you into this range of 3 standard deviations from the mean, which is what Dr. Barry Wireman's talking about.
Great, thank you. Okay. Another question. I was wondering, so the guidelines that you provided for that kind of adjusting scale for acceptable sound levels, you mentioned that these had been applied satisfactorily elsewhere. Could you tell us a little bit about where else you've applied them?
Well, on my trip out there, I was in Rossmore, California, the day before I was at your location. And I was at 2 city locations that were relatively noisy. Both sites were every bit as noisy as your city hall. And I got background noise levels in the mid-50s at both locations. Now, their closest homes there are about 350 feet from the proposed location of courts. But I measured levels in the range of around 60 dBA, but with background noise level of 55 dBA, for instance, it would be unreasonable to say you have to get pickleball noise down to 50 dBA. On the other hand, I think you should try to get it down to 50 dBA at Lower Libby Park. At Lower Libby Park, the background noise level was 45. If you could get the noise level down to 50, which is not that much reduction, I think it would no longer be a problem. You do not need to be at 50 dBA at City Hall, because the noise level I measured there was 55 dBA. You wouldn't hear it at all. But if you brought it up to about the level, if it had an equal power level to the background noise level, let's say the background noise level was 55 dBA, long-term average. If you brought the sound level of pickleball to that same level, that same exact level, that would add an equal amount of power to the sound level meter reading, which is a 3 dB increase. So that's how we get to the conclusion that if you bring this pickleball sound level to about the level of background noise, your meter will read 3 decibels higher, and that's an acceptable number. So you simply start with whatever. If it's a very, very noisy location, we have one in New Jersey, it's right by a series of bars. It's extremely noisy. The courts are right across the street from it. At 65 dBA, you can't hear the pickleball. The trouble is at 75 dBA right across the street. So we have, that level of what's acceptable varies with the community is my point.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Okay. And then the other question I had was at the current site, the City Hall site, given the existing fence structure that we have, are there any modifications like changing the material on the existing fences or improving kind of the coverage of the sound mitigation material that would kind of have any substantial benefit? Just thinking simpler things than replacing fences.
Well, you have sort of two problems there. One is the homes across the street are 2-story homes. They can effectively see over that. If you were trying to bring these levels down to under the background noise level, you certainly can't do that with any barrier of the existing height. You would have to go higher if that was your objective, to bring the levels of the second story down. If you wanted to bring the noise level down at the road level, then going slightly higher with that, a couple of feet higher, would benefit you. However, the barriers you have in place, acoustifence and concrete, are highly reflective. No sound is going through those barriers. You're not worrying. If you doubled up the thickness of the barrier, it would buy you nothing, because as Dr. Wyman said, the sound goes over the top or around the sides. At that location, I believe it's going over the top. The only solution is push the top higher or reduce the energy of the original sound source by going to different paddles and balls.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, I'm gonna move on to public comment. So our first person will be Robin Gerber.
Hello, and Robin Gerber, Termina Lane. Thank you all for your service. I play tennis, but I also play pickleball. But I've got to say, in terms of Libby Park, which is a special case, very special case, if only we only had to think about sound, that would be great, but you don't. Loss of even one court would adversely affect the Libby tennis community. There are many, many tennis players who use Libby Park, who use the courts on a regular basis. I'm one of them. And easily thousands who use these courts over the course of a year. But a total of only 8 public courts in this tennis mecca. Frankly, we could use more courts. Contrary to remarks made at numerous city council and commission meetings, tennis is growing. It's not declining. There's been an increase of 30% last year nationwide, and especially a large increase in the youth category. Of course, there are times when the Libby Park courts are not fully utilized, and at other times they are. This, by the way, is also true of the pickleball courts, and I've seen it. Local tennis players speak many times of the difficulty of getting a court, and I can tell you that's true. The key measurement of court utilization should not be the total or overall utilization rate, but the utilization during peak hours. Libby Park courts are currently rented out to Wild Tennis Academy, other tennis instructors. That reduces the availability. We need all of the courts for tennis. Libby is simply not a viable site for pickleball. And I think the city, working together with the pickleball community, should explore alternative locations. Frankly, I don't understand why no one has looked more at the 2 courts where Mr. Trout originated pickleball here over on the Matilaha campus. And with the school district in some degree of disarray and possibly new leadership appearing, might be the time to go back and have a discussion about those two courts, which are pretty isolated. And of course, people are talking about Soul Park. Let me just say, you now have the authority to work on the Soul Park project, which is great. But I would just remind you, because I know some of you are avid pickleball players, that your duty is to be unbiased and fair, and to remember that you're serving the whole community. I've heard comments about how Soul Park is somehow completely unviable and too much money. You need to come into it with a completely blank slate in your head and listen to all the information and make the decision. I think Soul Park is a great place. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Tim Kraut.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners, and staff. This 70-page study of pickleball sound is pretty exhaustive. If you notice, page 2 of the report, the city has installed acoustical fence panels on the south and east side already, installed a 6-foot gabion wall with an additional 6 foot on top of that of acoustical fence, and limiting the court hours. Some other things in this report I want to point out are as follows. On page 4, pickleball, it says, pickleball measured as a continuous noise is below the city of Ojai's noise limits. Page 6, when pickleball play involves 2 or more courts, the sound from 2 or more games does not increase the overall sound level. Page 7, the reference dB levels that they give for common sounds indicate that dBs for a washing machine is 70 dBs, hair dryers 70 dBs, and city streets 70 dBs, which is a lot higher than what we're doing. Page 9, exposure to pickleball noise will not cause hearing loss for players on the court or for residents living nearby. Page 14, in all cases, opinions are avoided. Opinions are those statements not necessarily based on fact or knowledge. However, there are many opinions given in this report. Page 44, there is a list of 19 paddles recommended for use in this report. There are thousands of paddles on the market. Did the author of the study test all these paddles and test all the balls? And finally, page 57, the author of the study states, actual sound levels will vary over time. In addition, it is not possible to determine what any particular person believes is an acceptable sound level. It's all subjective.
Thank you. Next is Leslie Rule.
Can I go last? Would that be all right?
It's fine with me. Bill Miley, please. Thank you.
Hello. For the record, my name is Bill Miley, and I'm a member of the Citizens for a Sound Pickleball Policy. I have these things to say. One key issue is the repetitive nature of the higher frequency sound that the pickleball hit generates. The repetitive nature. It's in milliseconds. It occurs in about 5 milliseconds. Now, the issue may be something like, well, it's not that loud, but it is over 50 decibels. Now, if I say pop, 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 those are 3 hits. But if you have 16 players on 4 courts, you have pop, 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 pop. That's part of the perceived sound, not pop, pop. Okay. Our white paper that we produced about 6 months ago, we counted the pops on 1 hour, and there were 1,700, over 1,700 pops. the background noise on Ventura Street varies. There are times when there's no cars and there's no sound, and it might be 40 decibels. And other times there's trucks going up and such. So if you average it, they said, what, 50? But it's much lower at other times. Okay. The folks said that shot changes are important. It's a distribution, they different in levels, times, smasher shots, small, soft shots and such. So it's going up and down. 2-story homes, he mentioned you have to have a real high barrier, and that's where sound goes up and bedrooms are upstairs. So how pickleball sounds can be perceived differently. If people play it, they like it. People who are living nearby, they may not. They don't. So when I was walking into the city hall tonight, on the opposite side of the pickleball court, I could hear the pops. Big buildings in front of me between the court and where I was walking in. I could hear tuck, 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 tuck. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Greg Linnemeyer.
Good evening, and thank you for letting us speak tonight. I'm an owner and a resident of Ojai, but I'm considered a newbie. I've only been here 2 years. I've played pickleball for 13. It's a passion. I ran my own test today, and I won't bill you for it. It was a bright sunny day, and pickleball was in full force this morning, and I don't typically play in the mornings, but I decided to drive by. And I parked across the street by the apartments and condos. And I decided that maybe I would look at it from the outside looking in, not as a player, because when you're in the thick of things, it's a totally different experience. And I was quite honestly shocked that there was more noise than I had expected. But I walked around and I thought, who in the heck is bothered by this? There aren't any front yards. There aren't any patios. There's no balconies. They must be complaining from the inside. So I got back in my car, rolled up the window, and I tried to make it like I was inside my house. Outside, I probably heard 65% of the shots. And I was really kind of shocked, but when I got inside the car and rolled up the window, I couldn't hear a thing. Absolutely nothing. I had to really, really try hard to find the muffled sound that I heard. And there were very few. Maybe 2% of the shots you could barely hear. So I guess my question is, most of the voices we hear that oppose all this noise don't even live in the residence. Why aren't we taking these sound studies inside the homes where the problems exist, if they do exist? It would make sense to me that, I could have meditated in my car today, it was so quiet. But if you're in your house, you're doing activities, you got the TV on. We live behind a football field, for God's sakes, and we didn't hear football on Friday nights. I just really think we're climbing up the wrong tree. And there's people making money giving you sound studies that should be taken on the inside of the residents of the problem. We could have changed their windows and given them double pane windows for less than it costs for all these sound walls, and maybe mitigated the problem.
Thank you. Julie Boger, I'm not sure if I got that right.
Good evening. My name is Julie Boga. I live in the city of Ojai in Creekside Village, and I have played pickleball for the last 12 years, and I currently play in the afternoons usually on these lovely city courts here. Just a quick analogy. I used to be a tour guide. I used to lead groups of people to Hawaii back in the 1990s. we always had a few complainers in the group, no matter how hard we tried, and I took groups of 60 to 100 people. Ultimately, it would take time and valuable resources to try and make these unhappy people happy. And it really worked, since some people are just unhappy, chronic complainers. I see the same thing happening here with a few complaining neighbors trying to dictate the fun and the future of 200 plus Ojai pickleball players here in our lovely city. It's a recreational area that has been there for many, many years for people to recreate on, and it has been improved and maintained by the players themselves, myself included. The hours of play were reduced, and the complainers were still not happy. An expensive sound study was requested and has now been performed. They are still not happy. And according to one property owner, these are the unhappy tenants that have chosen to rent and live in a particular location that is right across the street from a recreational area that has been deeded years and years ago for that purpose. I won't go into my comments on the sound test. I found it very informative, the presentation. I did have questions, some of which you asked, thank you, and I got the answers too. I agree with Greg Linnemeyer. The sound tests should have been performed inside the homes of those that are so unhappy with the sound of joy and community fun. Again, pickleball is growing. It's not going away. We need to accommodate the growth. We're in a position now, as I have mentioned numerous times before when I've spoken, we have many, many other people coming to the Ojai Valley to play pickleball. People from Ventura and Camarillo, Santa Barbara, they're coming to Ojai. They want to play on nice courts. And they bring business to the city of Ojai too. And I do have a quick question. I don't expect an answer, but I'm interested to know if the sound experts that performed this exhaustive study actually play pickleball themselves. Because if they did, they would understand how ridiculous it is to suggest quiet equipment, paddles and balls for anybody who's been playing pickleball for any length of time. It's fine for beginners, it's fine for people that really don't understand the sport too well, but those in the competitive arena, it would be like asking a high-level tennis player to play with foam tennis balls and then go and play in a tournament with a real tennis ball and a real racket. It's just not going to work. Thank you very much for your time, your work, and your consideration. It's really very much appreciated.
Thank you. Brenda Kraut.
Good evening. I was one of the people involved in the testing. I mean, I was one of the players off and on. And in fact, I wasn't even planning on speaking tonight, but after listening to the presenter, he said that he brought paddles because they were commonly used paddles, and he wanted all the players to use commonly used paddles. Well, that was a little misrepresentation because, I mean, I was there when he explained it 3 times. He explained it at Soul Park, and then he explained it at Libby, and then here. And he had, in particular, this one paddle that he referred to as being a Paddle Tech paddle. And he said, I have this old paddle that is one of the loudest paddles there is, and I want the hardest hitter to use this. Which one of you is the hardest hitter here? And one person was designated, one of the men, of course, that was designated. So that paddle that he had was an old paddle. In fact, we used to have one of those paddles, but it's very old. We don't have that anymore. And I don't know any of our regular players that come here regularly that have that paddle. And, you know, that was a misrepresentation. The people who play here regularly are always getting new paddles because new paddles are coming out, new innovations and things that are sold as making your game better. And so we don't have, I mean, there may be an occasional visitor that walks on the court that has some old paddle, but if you went out here and surveyed the people who play here routinely, you would not find a paddle that's probably more than 2 years old, if that. So I think that was a very big misrepresentation on how he presented that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie Rule.
Hi, I'm Leslie Rule. I am City Council person for District 1, and I'm also a pickleball player and also a tennis player. And so I'm here. I wanted to just give a little bit of feedback. That was a very informative presentation. Learned more about pickleball than I think I want to know. But here's just a couple of things that sort of jumped out at me. Now, I know I kept hearing noise, this is noise, and really it's sound, you know, and so even that particular approach is to say noise has a very pejorative approach. It's sound, it's a wavelength. So let's talk about it in that particular way. The other thing that really jumped out at me was worst case scenario. Well, what about best case scenario? I mean, worst case scenario, and a little bit of the probing as to what does a worst case scenario really mean? Is it a heavy hit once every 5 minutes? Like what does that actually mean? And why would we assume a worst case scenario? This isn't a bridge. This isn't a calamity. This is people out there enjoying themselves and having fun. I also wanted to point out, you might know, you might not know, that pickleball was played at Libby Park for a year. There was never a complaint, not one. And when we talk about Libby Park, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this, we're talking about one home, okay? And when we talk about City Park, we're talking really about 2 buildings, and there haven't been any complaints lately. So when my good friend Robin will say the greatest, will say serving the community, I would say serving the greatest number of people in the greatest way. So even though it is possible to get a petition with 100 signatures on it, in fact, how many people are we talking about? Because in the end, this is a park, and as you probably also know, noise ordinances are not enforceable in parks. They are not applicable to parks. So that is also something to keep in mind. And I could go on about worst case scenario, and the planning department decides around sound and noise ordinances, and they don't take worst case scenario into account. They don't make an ordinance for a worst case scenario. So anyway, those were some things that just jumped out at me. Yeah, I think, and I appreciated that report. It was great. And I think I probably will just leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, that is all of the cards I have for this item. Anyone else?
We do have several
On
speakers,
Zoom? Okay.
yeah, via Zoom.
Great.
As of right now, I have 12 attendees with 6 that have raised their hands.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and bring Ian to go ahead and speak. Ian, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Yep. Can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate the time to talk here. And I'm really excited that I'm first to talk because I'm a little fired up about this. First, I'm a tennis player. I live in downtown Ojai. I'm also a volunteer for the Ojai tennis tournament and a very active tennis community member. There's been a lot of points being made about the various pickleball noise measurements at Libby. And no pun intended, I'm tired of hearing about it. And to me, it's not even the main point. It might be why pickleball is having to fight this fight, but it's not the main point for me as a tennis player. The point for me is that there are other options for pickleball courts that can be built, but the pickleball community is not interested in exploring those options, which kind of shows how they're choosing to make their argument. You don't hear anything about why Libby Park over other suggestions. Instead, we're listening to conversations for an hour about the types of balls, the types of paddles, how hard are they hitting, how can we enforce it, what are some natural sound barriers, what are some sound barriers that we need to build. They'd rather take the textbook pickleball approach of stealing tennis courts, which is the way other cities have addressed this. So what's different about Ojai? I mean, the difference is we have a 127-year-old tennis tournament. The difference is we have a tennis academy that trains aspiring young tennis players that use the courts at Libby. The difference is we have an abundant tennis community that uses the courts every single day. I've been down there, and typically the lower courts are always more full. These courts are maintained by the hard work from these groups that I just mentioned, and not the pickleball community. You don't see paddle tennis players lining up to lobby for a court at Libby. You don't see basketball players lobbying for a court at Libby. This isn't a tennis problem. This is a pickleball problem. And it's pickleball that needs to find a new place to play because of the noise, and all the rules and modifications that we're talking about are all issues that can be solved by not having it in the center of our town. The last point that I'll make is, and I made this point on one of the previous council meetings about this issue, is I admire that the pickleball community is organizing and working to grow. In fact, I'd be happy to organize some sort of a tennis players for pickleball fundraiser to help them generate the funds that they need to find a place to play. But the fact is the tennis community also organizes and is growing. I hosted an amateur tennis tournament last year with 48 players that came in from all over SoCal and brought business to Ojai. We organized a Friday night mixed doubles group that reserved courts 10 weeks in a row during the spring. And we're organizing another amateur tennis tournament in this May, right after the Ojai. And for me, there's no reason that I can see that pickleball should be prioritized over an already established community in a city that was voted second best tennis city in America not too long ago. And with that, that's everything I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next, we have a community member. Unfortunately, their name's not displayed. It just simply indicates MacBook. So we'll go ahead and bring that person in to speak. Hello, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Yeah, hi, my name is Susan and I am adjacent to the park. First of all, I just thank you all for continuing this conversation. I'm a little perplexed as to why we're still talking about it when I thought we had such a great solution. But I would like to just start by saying I don't appreciate being characterized as a complainer. Those of us who are objecting to the courts in Libby are not unhappy or impossible to please. We don't have kind of this character that suggests that we're always looking for, depriving people of their fun. We just don't want to hear the sharp, repetitive noise day in and day out, nor do we want to have to lock ourselves inside our home to protect ourselves from this noise. So the fellow that talked about, well, let's test from indoors. We live largely outdoors. We bought our home on Signal because we are very outdoor people. We already hear it on Ventura. And the idea that the fencing is not protecting the people at the city hall, on the city hall courts because of the second story. You can't build a fence high enough to go uphill to where many of us live, and the sound is amplified and carried upward. I just wonder what would happen if some of the people who keep pushing for pickleball in Libby were told that new courts are going to be designed and installed right by their house, where they're going to hear pickleball all day long. And these are pickleball lovers and they love the game and they're so offended that, we are trying to protect our peace and quiet. It's so easy to say that the sound isn't a problem when you're not personally impacted, but ours will be unquestionably and permanently altered. So let's just be practical. I appreciate that the sound studies have been done, but we don't need a sound study to tell us that pickleball is loud. You can say it's compared to a dryer or compared to ambient noise around. It's just loud. And as somebody said, it's repetitive, it's ongoing, it's high pitched, it's unrelenting, and people are yelling while they play. And the idea that we would have different balls or different paddles and that those could be enforced, first of all, the impact is so minuscule. I don't see that it's going to take care of the problem. And for people who are living upstream, there's just no solution other than don't do it. I had a friend in town actually just yesterday who's been wanting to move here, and we saw a little property near the park, and I thought, oh gosh, please, they left the outside of it. It was really kind of seemed like it might be a great fit. And then, I had to be honest and say, well, there's a possibility, hopefully it's not going to happen, that there could be pickleball. And she said that would never work because in her community, there are lawsuits because of the noise. I mean, it's not a secret that no matter how many fences you build or whatever paddles you use, you don't want to live near it. And if the people who are proposing that that we're just, selfish and don't want them to have fun had to live next to it, I think that they would feel differently. That's sort of human nature. So I really hope we can finally put this to rest, move it out to Seoul. And I love Robin's idea of maybe Matilaha going forward, that there might be other venues that create more distance, that don't amplify the sound by the height, and, of course, preserve the courts for those who love to play tennis. So thank you guys for this effort. And I truly hope that we can put an end to this and just accept the reality that pickleball is really loud, and that people who live here and thought they could have peace and quiet near their homes truly hope that you'll pursue other options. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have Mike Borders. Mike, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, commissioners and staff. I just want to point out that, not to diminish a noise issue, but in addition to the noise issue, there are a number of considerations. And I would like to reiterate, and several other members of the Ojai Valley Tennis Club would like to reiterate some of these considerations prior to the ad hoc committee making its final recommendations for consideration by the commission at its next meeting. As a starting point, the city must consider the long and unique history of the Libby Park courts, originally developed around the turn of the century by private parties, including Edward Drummond Libby. Libby Park, including the tennis courts, was owned and operated from 1915 through 1970 by the Ojai Civic Association. In 1970, the entire park was donated to the city. Over the years, since the 1970 transfer to the city, a special, unique relationship pertaining to the maintenance of the Libby Park tennis courts has developed among the city, the Ojai Civic Association, and the Ojai Valley Tennis Club. While legally the tennis courts are the property of the city's financial circumstances required that it receive financial assistance in improving and maintaining such courts. In fact, such maintenance costs have been shared in various ways by these three parties over the years. Over the past 23 years, over 85% of the costs of constructing and maintaining all 8 Libby Park tennis courts have been donated by the Tennis Club and Civic Association. Again, legally, these courts may belong to the city, but we firmly believe that the intent of the private donors, as well as of the city at the time of accepting these donations, creates an implied and equitable obligation on the part of the city to use these courts for their intended purposes, tennis. Consistent with its stipulated charitable objectives, the tennis club absolutely intended that these Libby Park tennis courts should be used for tennis activities, sponsored by the tennis club, as well as for all other city and community tennis activities. The key word is tennis. The thought that these courts might be used for pickleball never crossed our minds when we spent the money and donated the improvements to the city. Had we thought of it, we would certainly have rejected the possibility. It seems clear to me that the overwhelming majority of Ojai community members oppose the use of Libby Park tennis courts for pickleball. In 2019, we collected over 340 petition signatures and emails opposing the use of these courts for pickleball, with only a 4-day effort prior to a hastily called council meeting. Again, in 2022, prior to the March 3rd meeting of the commission, we collected over 250 petition signatures opposing the use of Libby Park courts for pickleball. As will be discussed later, however, and as we have stressed many times before, the tennis community is not opposed to the game of pickleball itself. We just don't want it on the historic Libby Park tennis courts. It is our strong desire that a permanent pickleball complex be established at Seoul Park or elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dwayne Williamson. And Dwayne, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, commissioners. A lot of focus tonight has been on noise, or shall we say sound, but there's other considerations in your choice of where you're going to put the next pickleball courts, and particularly the courts at Lower Libby. Just to give you a little bit of background, since the year 2000, the Ojai Tennis Club has spent over $650,000 improving and maintaining the tennis courts at Libby Park. Specifically in 2010, a $250,000 improvement project to put post-tension concrete courts at the Lower Libby courts was taken under by the Ojai Tennis Club with no financial assistance from the city. The city, in recognition of the city's current and longstanding policy allowing the club's use of the facilities without fee, the city passed Resolution 1018, wherein it agreed that the tennis club be given first priority use of the Lower Libby tennis courts for the annual Ojai Tennis Tournament, and also, and most importantly, for club-sponsored youth clinics and tournaments. What this would mean that Court 6 and all other Lower Libby courts must be available to the tennis club in the same condition as the adjacent Lower Libby courts prior to and during these various tennis club events. Everybody thinks of the annual tennis tournament. However, we have other club-sponsored events. Just last month, we had the Jacob Voss Holiday Challenge, which used all 8 Libby courts. In mid-March, we're having the High Performance Clinic. In the summer, we'll have the Ventura County Junior Tennis Association. So if the Park and Recreation Commission recommends Libby Park for pickleball, what would these courts look like? Would they be permanent, temporary? Who would be responsible for transitioning them and absorbing the cost and changing the pickleball courts to tennis and then converting it back to pickleball? So wanting to consider that, I think the resolution is very important to consider. And then how are you going to manage these changing of courts back and forth? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we have Katrina Reich-Schmidt. Katrina, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Yes, I am here and I can hear you. Good evening. I live in downtown Ojai and have lived here for about 22 years. I play tennis and occasionally play pickleball. Both sports are great. I enjoy playing both. But I am here to talk about Libby Park courts that were purpose-built for the relatively quiet sport of tennis. The sound study didn't talk about the sound annoyance of having the popping pickleball sounds adjacent to those who are playing the more quiet sport of tennis. But there are other issues of concerns beyond that, specifically transitional issues on the courts. It's been pointed out by some that the current use restrictions on the Lower Libby courts do not preclude dual or shared use for both tennis and pickleball. And this was also mentioned in the Commission Ad Hoc Committee's May 1st, 2022 interim report. This option presumably would involve the overlay of either permanent or temporary pickleball lines on the tennis courts over the tennis court lines, and the use of temporary removable pickleball nets so that the pickleball courts could be transitioned back and forth to tennis courts when the need arises. But any type of overlaid pickleball lines, whether permanent or temporary, makes both tennis and pickleball play more difficult and potentially more dangerous. In 2019, the trial of having 2 temporary pickleball courts overlaid on court 6 resulted in numerous complaints from tennis players as to both noise and duplicate court lines. So if there were 4 pickleball courts overlaid on court 6, then the situation would be that much worse. Sanctioning tennis organizations, for example, Pac-12, who uses those courts for the prestigious Ojai tournament. They do not allow competitive matches to be played on tennis courts that have both tennis and pickleball lines. So the use of permanent lines would not appear to be a viable option, so we can continue with our prestigious tournament. There's issues with removal of temporary pickleball lines. While chalk or tape lines can be easily removed, our real world experience from what happened in the past suggests that these lines cause damage to the tennis court surface, requiring patching or resurfacing of the tennis courts. And using patched courts would not be acceptable for use in the Ojai tournament. So any court damage would likely require a complete resurfacing with the associated time and expense. So there are several logistical issues with respect to shared use, not just noise. And I'm talking noise from one court to the next. Those playing tennis affected by the sound of the popping pickleball. Some of the issues will be like who determines the weekly, daily schedule of tennis and pickleball, and which group has priority as to use what court. Just food for thought, just to something to think about. And my recommendation is best not to invite these logistical issues at all. The tennis courts at Libby Park were purpose-built for tennis. Let's build purpose-built.
Your time is up. I'm sorry to interrupt. Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Jeff, can you confirm you can hear us, please? Jeff, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Yes, I got you now. Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time. I just wanted to follow up on the resolution, the 1018, and the cost of converting the lower Libby courts for tennis and going back and forth. So we currently have 4 annual events that we use lower Libby for. And the current cost for converting court 6, it would be $17,500 per occurrence. So with the 4 events, that's a total cost of $70,000 per year, and doesn't include the initial cost of purchasing pickleball nets, startup equipment, possibly increasing the sound barriers. So those costs are included too. So another factor with the conversion is it would also take 2 to 4 weeks for each conversion based on the contractor's schedule to make that happen. So total lost court time every year doing the conversions would be 3 to 4 months. So that doesn't make much sense to me. It would cost the city or whoever pays for the conversion, it's going to cost $1,500 every day for the use of 2 pickleball courts for 8 or 9 months of the year. That just doesn't quite pencil out. But so if the goal is to have 8 permanent pickleball courts, the best option by far, I think, is Soul Park. I mean, the money saved in just 4 years of not doing the conversion would total $280,000. And that money, frankly, is enough money to buy, to build 4 brand new state-of-the-art courts with lighting at Soul Park. So anyway, I hope you consider that. Again, I think Soul Park is by far the greatest opportunity. It's a very underused resource we have in this valley. It's got tons of parking, shade, facilities. So anyway, thank you. I hope you consider that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And next we have Miss Stacy Potter. Stacy, can you confirm you can hear us, please? We may have lost Ms. Potter. Can you confirm you can hear us, please? Ms. Potter, I think you may be on mute.
Can you hear me?
We can now. Thank you.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Stacy Margolin Potter, and I'm a resident of Ojai for 28 years. And I'm been a tennis player. I was a professional tennis player. I won the Ojai 7 times. And I would just love to say that after being a tennis player my whole life, I've now converted to pickleball and just love it and all the joy that it's brought to me and my community. And I really feel that Soul Park would be the best permanent location for pickleball in the Ojai community. There's been a group of us. We've formed a group called the Soul Park Pickleball Project, and we are ready and willing to help in any way to make pickleball at Soul Park a reality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Karen Quimby. Karen, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, commissioners and Luis. My name is Karen Quimby and I represent the Citizens for Sound Pickleball Policy, a group of neighbors who have been impacted by the noise at the current City Hall courts or may be impacted in future development of courts at Libby Park or elsewhere. A year ago, the City Council instructed the Parks and Rec Commission to study the issue, specifically the costs and issues of expanding to pickleball play to Lower Libby, and to come back to the council with a recommendation. In the ensuing year, it was decided that the city needed to hire a professional acoustical firm to study the noise issues related to pickleball play at 3 sites, the City Hall courts, the Lower Libby courts, and Soul Park. This Parks and Rec Commission contracted with the reputable firm who conducted the study and provided this final report we're discussing tonight. Our neighborhood committee believes that this is a fair and unbiased report, and it comes to the conclusions, now science-based, that what we have been arguing for years now, that the noise generated by pickleball at the current City Hall courts needs major sound mitigation or to be shut down and moved to Soul Park, which is the ideal place for pickleball play. Ojai is fortunate to have such a location that meets all the needs of the pickleball community. Room for building world-class pickleball courts, ample parking and bathrooms, and a beautiful setting for the game. We believe the recommendations of the acoustical firm for mitigating the noise at the current City Hall courts are untenable. To build a 4-sided 30-foot tall sound barrier around the current courts, or to build a 15-foot sound barrier and require players to use special paddles and balls that help dampen the sound, a requirement we believe cannot be enforced unless there is a city-paid enforcement officer present at all times of pickleball play, and an option we've suggested before, by the way, that has been soundly rejected by the pickleball players and club. Moreover, when the original sound mitigating tarp was hung, the Ojai Historical Society objected to a taller tarp being hung on the east side of the courts because it would block views of the historic Smith's Hobson House, the City Hall. That tarp now is 3 foot high, not 30 foot high. The only and best solution, we believe, is to transition pickleball play to Soul Park immediately, temporarily using some of the paddleball courts at Soul Park until permanent pickleball courts can be built. In fact, we have a golden opportunity to enhance the recreational opportunities for older adults and younger people and children through the management agreement with Soul Park that will hopefully be finalized imminently, and we can get to work on building a world-class pickleball facility and rehabilitating the playing fields open at Soul Park for the enjoyment of all. The Ojai Tennis Club, our neighbor group, and avid pickleball players have been meeting to design and raise money for these courts under the name of the Soul Park Pickleball Project. We hope to supercharge that effort as soon as the management agreement is finalized. Thank you for your efforts in studying this issue in detail, and let's get to work to move forward quickly with a solution that works for all involved. Move the courts immediately to Soul Park and get to work building a world-class competitive facility to make Soul Park a pickleball paradise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, there are no other hands raised. If there are any other community members on via Zoom or on Zoom that wish to speak, please use the raise a hand feature. We have 2 additionals.
You do? Okay.
The first is going to be Jamie Roth. Jamie, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
I just wanted to say I'm in agreement with Susan and Paul, my neighbors here on South Signal Street. An 8-foot barrier will not work, as shown over on Ventura Street, nor is it enforceable for quieter paddles or balls, as we see, as we've seen historically. So I just wanted to give my support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have Katya Wellborn. Katya, can you confirm that you can hear us, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, you may
Yeah.
share your comment.
Hi. I just wanted to let you all get an idea of the court usage down at Lower Libby Courts. Being the head pro for the city of Ojai, I see firsthand who uses the courts on a daily basis. I'm on the courts 6 days out of the week. I personally reserve courts 7 and 8 for my morning privates or afternoon clinics for the rec department. My classes average from a minimum of 6 to a max of 12 total that run all year long. During my uses of the courts, the public come and go, whether it's for singles play, a doubles match, or a family coming to hit a few balls. If all the courts are being used, people will travel up to the upper courts or hit against the tennis wall and wait for an open court. By far, the courts are used most on the weekends. They are being used by myself, families, or USTA leagues. It is hard to get a court where people are waiting for one to open up. During the summertime, Mark Weil and myself reserve the courts for our summer programs, which can take up to 3 to 4 courts depending on the size of our camps. With the daily use comes the various tennis events that are run throughout the year. The Ojai Youth Tennis Committee hosts 2 events for the youth that utilizes all 8 courts. We have the Ojai Tennis Tournament. Last year, we hosted a live ball event that used all 4 lower courts. USTA leagues use all courts on the weekend basis. I hope you consider the daily, weekend, and yearly uses of the lower courts and your move to expand the pickleball courts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, that concludes all the speakers.
Okay. All right, so we will open it up to discussion. Karen, would you like to start?
Well, I think, really what we're looking for tonight, and we received a lot of information, is if there's specific things that the other commissioners would like to be addressed in our final report. I just, so that given that we have the sound report, the sound testing report, which is only one part of what we've been doing. It's actually, despite all the attention, it's probably one of the smaller parts of what we've done over the past 12 months. But again, I think we're looking for some, if you have specific questions that you feel like really need to be addressed, if you have specific background or other elaborations that you would like to see in the report. And if there's, we're excuse me, I don't know, my throat's kind of dry. We've tried to take a very holistic approach to this. So, but that's not to say that we've anticipated what everybody would like to be informed of. So I think we're not necessarily asking for opinions, but what would you like to be addressed?
And I guess maybe to clarify for everyone else's too, as well as that we're receiving this tonight as an informational item, and from our consultants. We had questions and a time to talk to them, and then we are handing it back to the ad hoc committee to do the rest of your work, and then we'll hear back from you next month.
That's right.
So if you guys don't have any more questions, or if, do you have anything, if anybody else has anything they should want to share or add to that, I think our work is done for tonight. Ryan, if you have anything else you want to share, because then you'll be back next month with
That's
your
right.
report.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of reiterate what Karen said, we're synthesizing everything that we've heard and researched over the past year, including this report, to put together our own report and provide a recommendation from our committee to the commission. And then from there, hopefully we can provide a recommendation to the city council.
Okay.
I just have one question. So I know a couple people commented on having the sound test done in their residence, just to get more information. Was there a reason why that wasn't done, or is there like some, litigation, or was there issues, or was it even considered as a source to?
I can offer you two answers to that. One, the white paper, no, excuse me, not the white paper, but the Citizens for Sound Pickleball Policies did have a test done from the inside, and we received that. Received that data. So that is part of what's going, input. And two, we'd have to get permission from the homeowner, and as was stated, most sound ordinances for cities, it's the property line. So it's not what is heard inside, it's what's heard at the property line.
Okay, if we don't have any further questions, and you don't have anything from us, then we'll move on to 6B.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And 6B is school park update as per our request of City Council. So I'll turn it over.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you.
Sorry, I didn't have the microphone on.
Okay. So earlier this week at its Tuesday, February 28th meeting, staff provided City Council an update on the Commission's request to be part of the process of forming a partnership with the County of Ventura for the use of Soul Park, which included providing input on the MOA. After receiving the update and discussing the idea, Council agreed to have the Parks and Recreation Commission participate in the process. Any input provided by the Commission would be relayed to Council for consideration. Council or their designee would then work with the county directly to finalize the partnership as well as the MOA. To this end, it is recommended, the Commission is encouraged at its next meeting to discuss and determine whether it wishes to form an ad hoc committee or work together as a whole on any recommendations for Council's consideration.
Okay, and so questions we could take, and then we have, I think, at least 2 public comments, and then we'll do that and come back for discussion.
So my question relates to timing and where everything is in the process. So at this point, there is no final MOU, correct?
Correct. No, fine. We have a draft of the MOA.
A draft, okay. And that's just, it's stayed within the group working on the draft. Is that correct?
That is correct. So, the last step was that it was legal for review, and that's where it is right now. Consideration of everything hasn't moved forward from there.
Okay. So if we if we put on the agenda for next month the discussion of how we want to be involved, which is what you just said,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Will that slow down the process? Will the process go forward without the commission input? I mean, how's that timing affect everything?
Sure. So that's a little bit of a tricky question to answer, and the only reason why I say that is just because I can't speak on behalf of council, but they did agree to allow the commission to participate. So with that, I would go ahead and assume that they would allow time for the commission to go ahead and determine whether it would want to go ahead and form an ad hoc committee or work as a whole to provide that input. I don't think that they would move forward without recommendation after the determination from Tuesday's meeting.
One other question. So we can't make any kind of decision tonight because it wasn't on the agenda.
Correct.
Is that
yeah,
correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's just as an update.
And for the entire commission to be involved, it seems like we'd always be kind of behind the process, right? If things have to come to us at a meeting and it's like there's another month, I think things are going to happen within that month without us. It seems to me like it would make more sense to have a committee that could work directly with the council.
And upon watching the meeting and listening to what happened, as a clarification, this is not an addition to their existing ad hoc committee. This would be something we're forming that we'd either do it as a whole body or we'd be forming to work directly with staff. Because at the moment, there is not an ad hoc committee. The committee were people that are no longer on council, so there's not a current council committee working on this, correct me if I'm wrong, at this time.
Okay.
You're correct.
The Crescent, so I guess the timing is out of our hands at this point, but yeah, I watched the meeting too, so maybe you can clarify. Would the intention be that if, however, the commission decided they wanted to be involved, would it continue beyond the memo of understanding phase? In other words, was it the city council intention that we should have ongoing involvement through staff in the developing of what's going to be beyond a memo of understanding? In other words, the plan.
Right. So yes. So it was in informing the partnership. So the partnership included the MOA.
I think that I think that's next time's discussion, and I think that what that should be is the discussion of this body of how we'd like to be involved. We now have an invitation to participate that I don't think was so clarified and so specific that there isn't room for us to be clear about what it is we're hoping to accomplish through the process. But there's now an invitation to participate. So I think that's next month's meeting so that we can put that together and discuss amongst ourselves of what our intent is and how we'd like to move forward and then send that back. But there definitely is an opportunity for us to participate. Are you wanting to? Please feel free.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Rachel Lang, I'm a member of the council, and I was actually standing up to get a comment card to chime in and help clear up some of these questions. So it's my understanding that we opted to not, if you want the support, it's there. But it's my understanding, and one of the reasons why I voted the way I did was because I know you all have been working on this, and we didn't want to slow down the process. And we really trust you to make good decisions, and so you have our support should you need it. But we would just ask that any negotiations or anything that you're that you are deciding with the county that you would bring before us. But really, our intention was to put this in your hands and not to interfere in the process, because you're the ones who know more about about this, and so yeah, so that was my understanding.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
So we do have 2 public comments. Should we go forward with public comment? Okay. Julie, you're back up again.
Julie Boga, I live in Ojai, and I've been playing pickle for 12 plus years. So here we go again, round 2. So the first time I spoke about the sound test. Now, completely different, I want to speak about Sol Park. The reason I was speaking about the sound test is I feel it's really, really important that you keep these courts here. But big picture, and not all of my pickleball family agree with me, but most do, that we need to really consider, as you are doing, as you will be doing, hopefully, moving to Sol Park. The tennis community is correct. I feel that they all feel that we all want to move to Libby, and we don't. That's not the big picture solution for the 100-year flood, the plan that is going to give longevity to the game of pickleball in the city of Ojai. Tim Kraut did bring up a very good point, as did one of the other speakers, and that is that we have school property now that may become available. Matilaha, for example, that will accommodate 6 to 8 pickleball courts quickly. And from what my feeling is, that time is of the essence here. And nothing moves slowly. It's out of everybody's control, but it really is at a snail's pace. But we have pressure from the neighbors, and Karen Quimby, quite rightly, we have the complaining neighbors to shut down these courts, which is unacceptable. We have the suggestion of moving immediately to Seoul, not possible because there aren't enough pickleball courts there. We have the tennis community up in arms about moving to Libby, quite rightly. My opening comment, actually, that I was going to mention to you when I came to the microphone this time, I will tell you now, and that's to quote the tennis player Martina Navratilova. And she said, and I quote, "I say if pickleball is that popular, then let them build their own courts." And you know what? She is absolutely correct. We need to build our own courts, and with your help and with the pickleball community's help and a mixture of monies from you, we can easily fundraise what is needed to convert Matilaha courts, build new courts at Seoul Park. Not a problem. We just need the green light to get this going, as a couple of my other colleagues and speakers have said. We need your help to get this going as soon as possible. And my question is, I don't know if you're allowed to answer, but what is the timeline? You can't push us out of here. We can't go to Libby. It's not appropriate. We need to go to Seoul. How long is this going to take? Is it 6 months? Is it 2 months? Is it, when do we anticipate getting the green light? Any ideas? Can I get a response? Do we have anything of a timeline? Because it's really becoming uncomfortable for everybody.
We really aren't. It isn't a back and forth here, so.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your efforts.
Okay, and Greg Linnemeyer.
Again, Greg Linnemeyer. I just want to reiterate a few more things that Julie did say. Our intentions are not to leave here if possible. This is a gem, and it has its place. Even if we grow, and we have to grow, we've got more demand than courts available right now. It's getting awkward playing. But city has its place and should be kept and I hope that you put all your energies to maintain this. Where we grow from here looks like A, possibly Seoul, and B, maybe Matilaha. But time is of the essence. We have designs for Seoul. We've gotten quotes for Seoul. We have backers, financial backers for Seoul. Those could be rolled over to Matilaha if this is going to take years. We've heard numbers like 2 or 3 years because Ojai doesn't move but like a slug. And we just want to get this thing going to appease the demand. And that's all we're trying to do. It's the most fun game in the world, but we don't want to step on tennis's toes. We don't want to step on paddle tennis's toes. We don't want to step on local residents. But the reality is, like I said, the noise factor outside, you're not going to avoid. That's there. But what is it really on the inside? And these people don't have yards, not like the gal that lives above Lower Libby. I can understand. Sound travels up, and she may not avoid it. Inside her house, she probably does. Outside, she might hear it occasionally. And I sympathize with that. But across the street, maybe just windows could change that whole scenario if, in fact, there's a problem. But nobody's gone inside to find out if there is a problem. We've got to maintain these courts, and we look forward to not only 4, but another 8 somewhere. That'll give us 12, and that'll appease us maybe for the next 4 or 5 years, and then we'll be back here hammering some more. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. Oh, you'd like to comment on this? Okay, come on up. One on Zoom as well. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Bill Miley. I want to talk about the issue on the agenda item, which is the city council involving the commission and the recreation department in the last negotiations for Soul Park. I want to represent that I spoke Tuesday night in favor of this, encouraging the city council to involve you, indicating that you're running a great recreation program. And as I've said before here, the guide that was put out is outstanding. So, and I got the impression that the city council is going to involve you. They may not involve you in actually talking with the county, but they're going to ask for your commentary and your suggestions and scheduling and such, so that their group can then, or the individuals from the city council and city manager can carry those to the county. So it's all positive. Thank you.
Yep.
We have Karen Quimby. Karen, can you confirm you can hear us, please?
Yes, I can.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Karen Quimby again. I just have to respond to the speaker before Bill, who my family owns the apartments across the street from the two-story apartments across the street from the City Hall courts. There are already double pane windows there. We did do a sound test inside the apartment that showed that the sound traveled up into those bedrooms and was beyond the city's current noise ordinance. And we provided that data to both the firm that spoke tonight as well as to the commission. There are backyards and side yards in those apartments as well, where you can very much hear the pickleball noise. So just to let everybody know that that's the reality there. I understand the courts are beautiful courts, and the pickleball players do not want to give them up. I totally get that and understand that. It's just it's not right to now have the sound study that shows that the noise does not allow the residents of these buildings, the renters there, to have quiet enjoyment of their homes. And that's the bottom line here. And we have a great solution at Soul Park. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else online, or we're?
That is
okay. So now we're moving on to 6C. Is there any other discussion, or we're good? And we'll re-agendize this for next month to put together whatever we're going to put together. Thank you. Okay, 6C.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'd like to go ahead and begin by noting that the department strives to offer wholesome year-round recreation programs and activities for our community to enjoy. As we look at participation trends and how they compare to previous years, it's important to note that the information provided in the tables is based off of registrations through ActiveNet, the registration system used by the department. And this doesn't include data from drop-in activities such as adult basketball, soccer, and ultimate frisbee. Individuals who participate in these type of offerings are able to do so by paying a fee and signing a liability waiver. Table one of the staff report includes program participation numbers from the most recent quarter, which is October 1st through December 31st, for the years of 2019, 20, 21, and 22. In 22, there were a total of 955 participants in a variety of programs. In 2021, there were 608. In 2020, there was 276, and in 2019, there were 936. So with that, the numbers in 2022 slightly surpassed those of 2019, which is prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since 2020, participation numbers have continued to increase steadily as more programs have become available. And to provide a little bit more context, we provided a second table in the staff report, which covers all 4 quarters of the years previously mentioned, 2019, 2020, 21, and 22. Quarters 1 the first quarter covers the time period between January 1st through March 31st. Quarter 2 covers April 1st through June 30th. quarter 3 covers July 1st through September 30th, and quarter 4 covers October 1st through December 31st. With this being noted, participation numbers in 2022 are very comparable to those in 2019. And since 2020, the numbers have continued to rise, to steadily increase as, again, more programs have become available. Staff is continuing to work to assure that there is an array of programs available for our community to enjoy. And additionally, we do invite community members, if they have any ideas for programs that they want to see, to contact the department there. So with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to the commission for any questions.
Thank you very much for this. I asked for it. We had it last year, and it's very informative. I just want to. It's so informative that I want to correct a couple errors.
Sure.
One, I think you want to say in the paragraph under Table 1 that the participation numbers have continued to steadily rise, and I think also you wanted to compare the second. Or you wanted to call out the second quarter of 2020.
Oh,
as
yes,
opposed to
yes,
2022
yes,
as the
yes,
lowest.
22, yes,
Yeah.
2020.
So, I mean, it's very clear. I would also, for future reports like this, I think it would be helpful when you put together the Table 2 to give the yearly totals.
Okay.
Across the board too. I think, being able to.
Sure.
Quarter by quarter is great, but annual is also great.
Okay.
And, so we're just about less than 500 total participants for the year under 2019 compared to 2022 compared to 2019. So I think that's, very good recovery, because that's what we're, because this is our 2022 is the first year really where we didn't have a lot of restrictions or concerns. So I think that's very, very good that we're back there. I guess I would wonder, I know it would be, I understand about the drop-ins, they're not registered, but I wonder if there's not some information that could be extrapolated from the fees. I mean, even if we got a report about the fees, here were the fees collected for, and you can either break it down by the activities or even just the total. That would also give us some, but on a comparison basis.
Sure, we can definitely go ahead and look into the viability of doing that.
And, any new activities that are added in a year, of course, should be sort of asterisked or whatever, so that we're comparing apples and oranges as we can. We're not comparing apples and oranges. Because so I think, and so for like the movie night, is that a?
That would be considered a drop-in
Right,
activity,
okay,
so yeah, so those wouldn't be.
So I know
in these
that's
totals.
been growing, and so I think that kind of information would be helpful, because this gives us a really good general picture of who's signing up, right? And I think the next thing, or the thing that would enhance this even more, is in how many additional people are more casually using.
Sure.
Somebody knocking on the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, but thanks. This is very helpful,
Okay.
and I hope
Yeah, it's so
useful.
funny, we had just talked about that, but about doing the individual ones. It's the only thing that makes it a little harder, but it's something we can do in the future, is that it's not an active net. It's accounted, the drop-ins are accounted differently. So that might be, this is a good time to talk about it, because then you guys could set up to do a monthly in a spreadsheet and just keep it all year long, so it's not a end of the year, or, a task each time we ask for this.
Sure. Yeah, we could definitely go ahead and do that.
It's great. The news is great. Thank you for the numbers.
Of course.
It's super positive, and I think we've added a much wider variety. Well, not much, but we have more variety than even in 2019. I feel like we've added new classes, we have new things, we've expanded some programs. So yeah, it's very positive.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together, and good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we're on to 60.
Okay. Perfect. So at last month's meeting, the commission received a public comment from Miss Jamie Roth, where it was noted that she and 6 other neighbors of the Libby Park requested that the commission consider the placement of a sign indicating that pickleball play was not permitted at the lower Libby tennis courts. As the meeting was set to conclude, Chair Taylor requested that staff at an upcoming meeting provide an update on signs throughout the city parks. With that being the case, the city does manage and maintain 6 parks and several open spaces throughout the city. At each location, informational signs may be found that provide details about that facility, its hours, rules, and regulations, such as seen in attachment A of the staff report. The city's goal through these signs is to provide clear and concise park information to park users. The signs also help ensure park goers' safety and help the park's maintenance as well as its image, and encourage learning experiences such as those in the demonstration garden. Every park within the city has policies governing its usage. However, most rules apply across the board for parks and city facilities. These include no consumption of alcohol beverages unless a proper permit is obtained through the city. Smoking is prohibited in city parks. Motorized vehicles are restricted from going onto grass or field areas. Fires are only permitted where grills are provided. And no person shall carry or discharge any firearms, airsoft guns, slingshots, or archery devices of any kind across or into a city park. And whenever any rules for a park are established, the uniqueness of that park or facility is taken into consideration. The main thing is when these rules are established is taking into consideration the park goer safety there. In particular to Lower Libby, there are several signs as seen in attachment B that can be found throughout the area. Those signs include usage for the rules for the usage of the tennis courts, the requirement of marking sole shoes, a notice about preferential use for the quick start court, and of course in consideration of the Parks and Recreation Commission, park rules and hours are set by council there. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to the commission for any questions or feedback on any changes that may be needed.
So I think this came about because there was a request to put something on the signs to not play pickleball.
Correct.
Right. Is that who could make that rule?
So that ultimately would be council. One of the things that the commission can do if it wishes to make that recommendation, as you know, the pickleball item is being discussed, if the commission wishes, that could be part of the recommendation, but ultimately it would go to council.
Okay, so that would be it. What we could do is make a recommendation to council to make a rule about
correct
the use of the court or not use of the court. Okay.
I think this is actually a very interesting inventory of all of our signs. I don't think I've ever looked at it this way. And it's interesting because there are certain things that I know are consistent because we have certain signs that are, you know, in the rules are in each area and then they're each unique. I think we have a lot of signage.
Yes.
That's what I came away with.
We
More than I
definitely
thought.
do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Could I possibly ask a question? Do you think you need us any more this evening?
I'm
It
so
is 3
sorry.
hours later here.
I didn't realize you were there, so that's my fault. I apologize. No,
No.
thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck to you.
My apologies.
Good night.
Good night.
Sorry.
Oh no, I feel that's awful. All right, sorry about that. I think at this time, we're getting this as just an informational item on signs. There's no action to be taken tonight. If we wanted to re-agendize, we could. I don't know that I think this is the appropriate time to re-agendize or even work on that. I think we're going to have our presentation next month and we'll see what comes out of that, and that would be the time to discuss if we were wanting to put that on as a future agenda item. But any other comments or?
I agree with you. I think it's very interesting to have this inventory of the signage.
Yeah.
And it's also I don't know for sure, but you could read a little history in this,
Mm-hmm.
I think. Yeah, but it's good to know that it's the council that would make the rule or make the decision as to changing or adding something to a sign. Yes, okay. Okay.
And the consistent items is the hours mostly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Again, across all of the
Yep.
all the locations. Okay. If
Okay.
there's no further discussion on that, we are on to number 7, informational items. So we're going to get our recreation department report.
Of course.
Thank you.
And bear with me here.
Take your
I have a lot of papers in
I know
front
there's a
of me,
lot.
so I apologize. Here we are. So over President's Week, the week of February 20th, we hosted 2 specialty camps. The first was Science Camp with Mr. Tim Baker, founder of Science Zippity. The second was Soccer Camp in partnership with the Ventura County Fusion. Both camps were a great success as participants had a lot of fun. Playoffs for the basketball program will begin this Saturday, March 3rd, and championships will be held on the week of March 11th. We invite the community to come out to support these young athletes as they play for the number 1 spot. Games are held in the gymnasium at Ojai Park, with every game beginning on the hour starting at 10 a.m. We'd like to take a quick minute to thank all of those who helped make this program possible, including our volunteer coaches, such as our very own Commissioner Walker. Commissioner Walker, thank you so much for your efforts. We couldn't have made had this without folks like yourself. So again, wanted to sincerely say thank you for volunteering to be a coach. Due to the recent rainstorms, the softball season has been postponed 1 week. The new season is scheduled to begin next Tuesday, of course, weather permitting. Those who may be interested still have time to give us a call. They can call our office, the Recreation Department office, for more information on joining a team. Starting on March 6th, the department will be offering a new program, Hacky-Do. Hacky-Do is similar to Hacky Sack. Participants have the ability to create their own Hacky-Do, play tag, volley, juggle, and kick one around, amongst other games. The program is designed for kids 10 to 15 years of age and will be held at the front lawn area of the park. This week, a new session of gymnastics kicked off with a total of 167 participants enrolled in the program. For the time being, the program has reached capacity, but we are working on figuring out how we can make other offerings within that program available. We're happy to announce the department will be hosting a spring camp on April 10th. For children ages 5 to 13th, staff will be facilitating group activities such as scavenger hunts, sports activities, arts and crafts, and more. Those that may be interested in the camp can learn more by visiting the department website or visiting us there in the office, in addition to actually enrolling for the camp. Looking ahead, we've begun to plan for the open house event, which will be held on Saturday, May 20th. This is a free community event, as most may know, and will be held at Ojai Park. There'll be an array of activities for community members to enjoy, and we'll provide more information on this event at next month's meeting. Moving on to the department highlight, we'd like to highlight our local youth for their achievements in athletic competitions this year. Many of our local high school athletic programs have reached CIF playoffs, including the Nordhoff girls and boys basketball team, the soccer team, the wrestling team at Thatcher, the girls soccer team reached CIF, and at Villanova, the girls water polo team and the girls water polo team and the boys basketball team reached CIF. At Oak Grove, the boys basketball team also reached CIF. Above all, we'd like to highlight our very own youth commissioner, Miss Ella Ruff. Not only does she hold an impressive 4.66 grade point average, but also help secure a CIF championship win for the volleyball team. Furthermore, Ms. Ruff earned an all-county honors in basketball, as well as an all-league honors in volleyball and swimming. In her spare time, Ms. Ruff serves as a treasurer for the California Student Board of Members Association, advisor to the Ojai School Board, lead defense attorney on her mock trial team, and is co-president of the California Scholarship Federation. And that is all, of course, in addition to serving as our youth liaison. So with that, please join me in giving her a well-deserved round of applause for all her accomplishments. Yeah. So with that, that concludes our update for this time around. But again, very well deserved. So again.
Okay. Thank you. City Council Liaison Report. If you please come up and.
Well, my report was going to be all on the agenda item that we talked about today. So I'll just reiterate that if there are any questions, or if you, as you're deciding about the creating an ad hoc committee or anything, just letting you know that we're here to help with that, or to clear up any confusion.
Thank you.
So thanks.
Okay. All right. Any commissioner reports and comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Future agenda items. We'll have the report back from the ad hoc committee next month. Bring back, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so for that, are we going to, so we're going to provide a recommendation from the committee, but should we agendize?
You're going to present your findings and then a recommendation.
Right.
That is an action item.
That's the question.
Discussion
Is yeah,
/ action
exactly.
item. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we want to wait until
No.
May to have a decision from the commission on it.
So we'll make it an action item, and if it
Yeah.
ends up not being an action item, that's okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we're going to bring back Sarzotti Sport Courts. Will be on the agenda for an update there. Is there anything else I'm forgetting?
So the Soul Park,
Soul
that would
Park.
be an
Park ad
action.
hoc committee. Okay, so we'll do pickleball action item, and then we'll do the sport courts update and the Soul Park. It's an action item, but it'll be discussion of how we want to approach that as a committee or as a whole body. Okay, that's all I know of. Anything else? No? Good. Okay, we're adjourning at 8:23. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.
They happened to catch the pickleball channel.